think about Adolf Hitler, we think ruthless Nazi leader whose war machine slaughtered millions during World War II. But young Adolf Hitler discovered the swastika in a church when he was a choir boy.
Wow, did not know that.
And feared his ancestors were Jewish.
That is surprising.
He also was terrified of sex and women.
Yeah, that's pretty hard to picture.
Didn't know that? Well, neither did most people in our national poll. And those are just some of the 10 things you don't know about Adolf Hitler. I'm David Eisenbach. I'm a historian and author. We're all familiar with history's famous figures and events, but how much do we really know about them? National poll results show that we don't have the full picture. I believe the things people don't know often have a surprising and big impact on history. When I say Adolf Hitler, what immediately pops to mind?
Crazy man.
Holocaust monster.
Redneck.
He was German.
He can't be a redneck and be German?
The greatest mass murderer of the 20th century.
The guy that almost took over the world.
If you bumped into a 20-year-old Adolf Hitler on the streets of Vienna in 1909, you would have met a homeless artist who might have gone off on a rant about opera, art, or maybe architecture. But politics just wasn't his thing. He had several Jewish friends and might have told you about how much he admired the Jewish people. So what happened to Hitler on the streets of Vienna and later in the trenches of World War I that transformed this artsy kid into a murderous monster? Well, I'm going to tell you 10 things you don't know about Adolf Hitler. What if I told you that Hitler, when he was a little choir boy, discovered the swastika in a church?
Where in the church would you see that?
I just wouldn't think that would have anything to do with that church.
Got me at disbelief there.
Adolf Hitler was a nice little Catholic choir boy, going to school in an 11th century Benedictine monastery in Lombok, Austria, happily singing hymns and dreaming of one day becoming a priest. As an adult, he would later claim the church services gave him an insight into how to awe an audience with music, pageantry, and dramatic emotion. Spending several hours a week in that church in Lombok also left another lasting impression on the young Adolf.
That Benedictine monastery had a number of decorative swastikas in it. They were everywhere. It's actually an old Hindu symbol that was adopted in a lot of Western decorative motifs. So that probably made some impression on him.
Hitler's boyhood discovery in church surprised a majority of people in our national poll. 75% didn't know it. For thousands of years, cultures around the world used the swastika as a symbol of good fortune. But after the Nazis adopted it to their cause, the swastika became a symbol for something completely different: evil incarnate. What if I told you that Hitler feared his ancestors were Jewish?
Wouldn't have guessed that one. I need to do some more reading on history, apparently.
I suppose in Hitler's mind that would have brought all sorts of conflicts and contradictions into light.
Kind of makes sense because it explains why he was such a terrible person.
Hitler had a very complicated family history. His father, Alois, was born in 1837 in Austria. He was given the last name of his mother, Maria Anna Schicklgruber, an unmarried 42-year-old peasant woman. 5 years later, Maria Anna married a man named Johann Georg Hiedler. And when Alois was 39 years old, he suddenly changed his name from Schicklgruber to Hitler, a variation on the spelling of the name Hiedler. But why would Adolf's father, Alois, suddenly change his name at 39 years old? Well, there were rumors that Alois' father, Hitler's grandfather, was a Jew.
Hitler's father was illegitimate. There's no doubt about that. One rumor was that the actual father was a 19-year-old Jew, by the name of Frankenberger from Graz, Austria. We can't say for sure. It is possible that Hitler did have a Jewish connection.
In our national poll, this was one of the best known of our 10 things. Even so, 42% didn't know it. Rumors that Hitler's grandfather was a Jew tortured him throughout his entire political career. And when Germany invaded Austria in 1938, Hitler ordered the German army to use his father's hometown of Dollersheim for artillery practice. Perhaps that was Hitler's way of wiping out all trace of his family's roots. I don't think it's a coincidence that a man so troubled by his own ancestry would become so obsessed with the family backgrounds of others. What if I said to you that Hitler was a high school dropout and a lazy kid?
That would blow my mind.
Really?
He seemed, in fact, the opposite of lazy in the worst way possible.
In 1900, when Hitler was 11 years old, his little brother Edmund died of measles. This deeply affected the young Adolf. Suddenly, the outgoing, confident choir boy who did well in school became a morose, detached, sullen rebel who constantly fought with his father and his teachers.
His father insisted that he go to a technical school in Austria in preparation to become a civil servant. And he later say in Mein Kampf that I got bad grades because I wanted to show my father that I had no interest in this. I wanted to become an artist.
Hitler's slacker behavior was news to a majority in our national poll. 72% didn't know this. After his father died in 1903, Adolf became even more disruptive in school, and while drunk, Hitler tore up his school certificate and used it as toilet paper. Well, somebody discovered the stained certificate and handed it over to the high school principal, who expelled Hitler. Adolf became a high school dropout. Next, was Adolf Hitler a mama's boy?
Well, he seemed to have gone crazy, so maybe it's all the pressure from the mom.
And did Hitler really fear sex and women?
That's something else that I wouldn't have thought he was capable of.
10 things you don't know about Adolf Hitler. We know now that young Adolf Hitler feared his family roots and was a high school dropout. Now we'll see that he had other fears as well, and only one source of encouragement. What if I told you Hitler was a mama's boy?
That'd be surprised at big time.
Maybe believe that.
Maybe.
Certainly when you see Hitler, you don't think of love, anybody loving him.
While Hitler's father browbeat him about school, it was his mother, Clara, who constantly fed his dreams of becoming an artist and reassured him that someday he would be a great success. When his mother was diagnosed with terminal cancer, her doctor, Edward Bloch, had to break the news to a 17-year-old Adolf. Bloch described the teenage Hitler as, quote, outwardly, his love for his mother was his most striking feature. I have never witnessed a closer attachment.
Hitler was extremely attached to his mother. She was one of the few women that he was ever devoted to in his life. And he was one of the few women that he actually revered.
Bloch tried an experimental treatment on Hitler's mother involving the use of iodoform, a chemical that he hoped would stop her cancer, but wound up poisoning her. The fact that Bloch was Jewish led some to speculate that Hitler became an anti-Semite after her death and decided to avenge Bloch's poisoning of her by poisoning all Jews. It's an interesting theory, but it doesn't jive with the facts. Young Hitler was grateful to Edward Bloch, and 30 years later, Nazi authorities were ordered to go easy on Bloch, and he was allowed to emigrate to the United States. What if I told you that Hitler was rejected from art school because he couldn't draw human beings?
If that was something he really wanted to do and denied, obviously a great source of frustration.
When Hitler was 18 years old, in 1907, the same year that his mother died, he left his hometown of Linz, Austria-Hungary, and went to the capital city of Vienna, hoping to gain entrance into the Academy of Fine Arts and embark upon his great dream to become an artist. The director of the academy reviewed Hitler's portfolio and personally gave him the crushing news that he was rejected. The director explained that while Hitler showed some talent when it came to buildings and landscapes, he couldn't accurately depict the human form. Within a year, he blew through all of his cash and became homeless. In the summer, he slept on park benches and in doorways, and in the winter, he entered a homeless shelter. Hitler later called his homeless years in Vienna the school of my life. Hitler's artistic failures painted a new picture for most people in our national poll. 80% didn't know it. You know, Deborah, I'm looking at these paintings by Adolf Hitler, and it's a really weird experience because you know that the hand behind them would later on become responsible for the death of millions of people.
Yes, I often think about if he would have been able to realize his ambitions, and I don't think Germany would have taken the course that it did. Because from a very early age, he was interested in the state being dominant over individuals. And it's reflected in his work of art. Buildings are always much more beautifully rendered. And this one is particularly interesting, and he puts himself on the bridge here. But if you look closely, there are no features on the face, which again is very, very revealing.
Kind of a sad character.
Yeah, well, but the idea that people who love art are necessarily good or noble is really not necessarily true.
What if I told you when he was in Vienna, he had a lot of Jewish friends?
You flipped like a pancake, sir. That raises a lot of questions on how everything got started then.
That's exactly right. That's the big mystery. Hitler would later blame the Jews for his rejection from art school. When he was the Fuhrer, he would say, "The Jews are now sorry for preventing me from becoming an artist." Well, at the time, he did not hold such anti-Semitic views. Hitler was very grateful to 3 Jewish art dealers who sold his paintings and kept him from starving. He was also grateful to Jewish charities that he relied upon when he was homeless, and frequently praised the cultural contributions of Jewish artists like writer Heinrich Heine and composer Felix Mendelssohn. And his best friend in Vienna was a Hungarian Jew named Josef Neumann. Neumann noticed that Hitler was so poor he didn't have an overcoat, and fearing that he was going to freeze to death in the Vienna winter, gave him a coat.
Eventually, he describes a turning point in his life where he went from seemingly having no problems with Jews, in fact, having interactions with them, to just believing that Jews were somehow a foreign element in German society, that they were different, that they just didn't fit in.
This defied belief for a huge majority in our national poll. 95% couldn't accept it. Hitler later said he didn't become an anti-Semite until after he got to Vienna. So what happened? He picked up a lot of the anti-Semitic pamphlets and journals that proliferated around turn-of-the-century Vienna. At first, he was appalled by them, but they provided an easy explanation for his personal failure. He didn't have to change his idle ways. He could just blame the Jews. And he could feel superior to an entire ethnic group, even though he was a penniless loser. What if I told you that Adolf Hitler feared sex and women?
Well, that makes me feel a little more powerful, knowing that Hitler would be afraid of me.
He would have been freaked out.
Okay.
Definitely not ladies' man.
Yeah. Among the anti-Semitic works that Hitler picked up in Vienna were those by George Ritter von Schoenerer. Von Schoenerer's nationalism had a bizarre twist. He ordered his followers not to have sex until they were 25 years old in order to preserve the purity of the German race. Von Schoenerer's teachings on sex resonated with the young Adolf, who had sexual hang-ups. One friend recounted a story that Hitler told him about a milkmaid who made advances towards young Adolf. Well, he flipped out and dashed out of the room, kicking over her bucket of churned milk.
In his younger years, though, interestingly, Hitler seemed to have little to no interest in women whatsoever. Even later on, during his service in World War I, he would be hanging out in a cadre of all male soldiers, and of course, they would talk about women, and Hitler seemed completely disinterested.
Hitler's hang-ups weren't that obvious to a majority in our national poll. 69% didn't know about them. Hitler would later explain the lack of a woman in his life by saying that he channeled all of his sexual energies into his speeches so he could seduce the crowd. But that does not explain why Hitler feared sex and women when he was a young artist. Next, was Hitler really told he didn't have leadership potential?
Well, obviously they were wrong, weren't they?
And did Hitler get his start in politics by working as a spy?
Well, he certainly took that bull by the horns.
10 things you don't know about Adolf Hitler. We know now that Hitler was a mama's boy, that he became an anti-Semite while he was homeless in Vienna, and that he feared sex and women. And now we'll see how World War I gives Hitler a new purpose in life. In 1913, a 24-year-old Hitler finally left Vienna for the burgeoning art scene in Munich, Germany, where he continued to live the life of a starving artist. But the next year, when Germany entered World War I, Hitler caught war fever. A photograph was taken of a massive crowd gathered in Munich's Odeonsplatz to listen to the announcement that Germany declared war. In it, we see the image of a young Adolf Hitler enthusiastically cheering the news. Hitler immediately volunteered for the German army. The war finally gave Hitler some purpose. In fact, danger did not deter Hitler. He volunteered for the very dangerous job as a dispatch runner. He received a number of medals for his bravery, the most prestigious of which was the Iron Cross First Class, awarded to him by a Jewish officer, Lieutenant Hugh Gutman.
Hitler was actually homeless just 5 years before the war. The war is his higher purpose. In it, he sees a way to demonstrate his Germanness. So for Hitler, the war was one of the first times he felt like he belonged to a group.
Hitler's early attraction to waging war caught a majority in our national poll off guard. 71% were unaware of it. Throughout his career, he would take outrageous risks because he believed that destiny guided his fate. During World War II, his commitment to listening to his inner voice rather than his generals led to his greatest military victories and his worst defeats. What if I told you that the German army did not promote him because he lacked leadership qualities?
Well, obviously they were wrong, weren't they?
I guess his ego won out and his brutalness won out.
It's amazing that they wouldn't have promoted him because of that, because he did such a great job of pulling people together to actually do the horrible things that they did.
Hitler never rose above the rank equivalent to a private first class in the American army because his superiors judged that he lacked leadership potential. His officers and fellow soldiers admired his bravery, but they thought Adolf was a weirdo. They called him the artist because he brought his canvases and paints to the front, and between battles would set up his easel and paint. He never talked to family or friends, didn't smoke or drink, and had no interest in going to brothels. Instead, he would sit and brood for hours alone.
He was regarded by his superiors as sloppy. He had an unmilitary bearing, they said. He didn't possess the leadership capabilities to become a sergeant, to become a non-commissioned officer. And that's why he didn't rise beyond the rank of corporal.
Throughout the war, Hitler had a wide, droopy mustache until he was ordered to clip it so that he could get his gas mask on easier. Well, ever the good soldier, Hitler started sporting the toothbrush mustache, which he would wear throughout the rest of his life. When the war was over, the prospect of returning to his directionless existence as a struggling artist terrified the 29-year-old Adolf Hitler. So, when the opportunity arose for him to stay in his beloved army, he took it. He also loved his commanding officer, Captain Karl Meyer. Meyer became a nurturing father figure that Adolf never had. In September 1919, Meyer ordered Hitler to spy on a small right-wing group called the German Workers' Party. They were founded by a Munich locksmith named Anton Drexler, who wanted to combine nationalism, socialism, and anti-Semitism. Hitler showed up at a meeting and quickly realized this small group was not going to overthrow the state. As he got up to leave, someone said something he didn't like. Well, Hitler launched into a fiery speech renouncing that guy. Anton Drexler turned to a friend and said, "This man has what it takes. We can use him."
It was tremendously ironic that he was sent to investigate this German Workers' Party, but then ultimately would be asked to join and shortly thereafter serve on their leadership committee and then turn it around and cultivate into this massive paramilitary engine that would become the Nazi Party later on, which would be the vehicle which he would ride to power.
This fact was still concealed from a big majority in our national poll. 87% didn't know it. It wasn't until he was in his 30s that Hitler realized the answer to all of his life's questions was a career in politics. Becoming the leader of the Nazi Party brought everything together for the young Adolf. The theatrics and the pageantry that captured his imagination when he was a little choir boy. He could regurgitate all the anti-Semitic ideas he picked up in Vienna. And he could re-experience the all-male camaraderie he enjoyed in the trenches of World War I. And as for the man who pushed him into politics, Captain Karl Mayr, well, in the 1920s, he became a big critic of Hitler. And when his protege rose to power in 1933, he fled to France. But during the Second World War, Mayr was arrested by the Nazis and he died in the Buchenwald concentration camp, becoming one of the millions of victims of the monster he helped create.